People think Alaska is just cold and empty. They're wrong about the empty part. It's full of things that don't want to be found, full of places that don't appear on maps, full of silence that isn't really silent if you know how to listen. In my 23 years as an Alaska State Trooper, I've seen frozen bodies that looked like they were sleeping, villages swallowed by avalanches, and people who walked into the wilderness and chose never to come back. But nothing prepared me for what I found in February 2022, 300 miles northwest of Fairbanks, in a place that, according to every map, every satellite image, every official record, doesn't exist. If you're watching this from Alaska, you know what I mean about the darkness. Not just the absence of light during our endless winter nights, but the weight of it, the way it presses against your mind. Drop a comment. What part of Alaska are you in? And have you ever found something out there that wasn't supposed to be there? My name is Sergeant Mike Kovac, Alaska State Troopers, retired. Well, retired is what they put on the paperwork. The truth is, after what happened at Newcomb, that's what the village called itself, I couldn't do the job anymore. Couldn't look at a map without wondering what else was hidden. Couldn't fly over the wilderness without searching for lights that shouldn't be there. This is the real story. Not what went in the official report. Not the sanitized version the state wants you to believe. This is what actually happened when I found a village of 147 people who, according to every government record, died in 1953. February in Alaska is a special kind of hell. It's not just the cold, though at 40 below, the air hurts to breathe and exposed skin can freeze in minutes. It's the darkness. In the far north, the sun barely rises, giving you maybe 4 hours of dim twilight that passes for daylight. It does things to your mind, that darkness. Makes you see things that aren't there. Or maybe it reveals things that are always there, hidden in the light. I was stationed out of Fairbanks, covering a territory roughly the size of Ohio with maybe a few thousand people scattered across it. Most of my calls were routine. Domestic disputes in dry villages, search and rescue for hunters who'd gotten turned around, welfare checks on elderly folks living alone in cabins 50 miles from their nearest neighbor. But on February 15th, 2022, I got a call that was anything but routine. It came from a bush pilot named Tommy Ashlock, a Yupik guy I'd known for 15 years. Tommy had flown everything from medical supplies to mail across interior Alaska, and he knew the terrain better than anyone. He wasn't the type to spook easily, but when his voice came through the radio that morning, he sounded genuinely rattled. "Mike, I need you to come out to Bettles. Got something you need to see," he said, the static making his words crackle. "What kind of something, Tommy?" I asked, already reaching for my gear. Bettles was a tiny town about 180 miles northwest of Fairbanks, mostly used as a jumping-off point for the gates of the Arctic National Park. "I found a village," he said after a pause. "A village that ain't supposed to be there." In Alaska, finding unexpected settlements wasn't entirely unusual. Native families sometimes established fishing or hunting camps that weren't on official maps, and occasionally you'd find hermits who'd built cabins in the middle of nowhere. But the way Tommy said it made me pay attention. "What do you mean, not supposed to be there?" "Mike, I've been flying this route for 20 years. This village, it's like it appeared overnight. And there's something else." His voice dropped lower. "The people there, they're all wearing clothes from the 1950s, and they acted like they'd never seen an airplane before." I took the state patrol plane out to Bettles that afternoon, fighting crosswinds and ice the whole way. The Cessna 185 was reliable but basic, and in February weather, every flight felt like a gamble. Tommy was waiting for me at the tiny airstrip, standing next to his own plane, a beat-up de Havilland Beaver that had seen better decades. Tommy was in his 50s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "It's about 60 miles northwest," he said, spreading out a topographical map on the wing of his plane. "Right here, in this valley." He pointed to a spot between two ridges. I looked at the map. It showed nothing but wilderness. No villages, no structures, not even old mining claims. "You sure about the location?" "I've got GPS coordinates," he said, pulling out his phone. "But Mike, here's the weird thing. When I tried to mark it on my GPS, it wouldn't save. Like the device couldn't accept that location exists." We took Tommy's plane, as he knew exactly where we were going. The flight was rough, with winds that threatened to slam us into the mountains more than once. The landscape below was an endless white expanse, broken only by black spruce forests and the occasional frozen river. As we flew, Tommy filled me in on the details. "I was flying supplies to a research station when the weather forced me to detour," he explained, raising his voice over the engine noise. "I saw smoke from chimneys, which caught my attention because there's nothing out here. So I circled lower to check it out. And it's a full village, Mike. Maybe 30, 40 buildings. Wooden structures. Looks like 1940s, 1950s construction. People walking around, kids playing. But here's the thing. When I circled back for another look, they were all standing in the middle of the village, just staring up at me. Every single one of them. Just standing there, watching." After 40 minutes of flying, Tommy started descending. "There," he said, pointing ahead. I looked where he was pointing and felt my stomach drop. Nestled in a valley between two ridges was indeed a village. Smoke rose from chimneys. Paths were worn in the snow between buildings, and I could see people moving around. It looked completely normal, except for one thing. It absolutely should not have existed. I'd studied maps of this area extensively as part of my job. This valley was supposed to be empty wilderness, had been empty for as long as records existed. The nearest known settlement was over 100 miles away. We circled the village once, and just as Tommy had described, people emerged from buildings and stood in the open, all facing up, all watching our plane. There must have been over 100 of them, dressed in heavy coats and furs that looked handmade. Even from the air, something felt off about how still they stood, how synchronized their movements were. "Where the hell do we land?" I asked. "There's a flat area about a mile south," Tommy said. "Looks like a frozen lake. Should hold the plane." The landing was rough but manageable. We suited up in our Arctic gear. At 40 below, you don't take chances, and began the trek toward the village. The sun was already setting, even though it was only 2 p.m., casting long shadows across the snow. Our breath came out in clouds that instantly crystallized in the air. As we approached the edge of the village, a group of men came out to meet us. They were dressed in parkas made of caribou hide, with fur-lined hoods and sealskin boots. Traditional clothing, but the style was decades old. The man in front appeared to be in his 60s, with deep-set eyes and a face marked by years of Arctic winters. "Hello," I called out in English, then repeated it in what little Inupiaq I knew. "I'm Sergeant Kovac with the Alaska State Troopers. This is Tommy Ashlock." The man studied us for a long moment before responding in accented English. "I am Joseph Newcomb. I speak for this village. Why have you come?" It was an odd way to phrase it, formal and stilted. But what struck me more was his accent. It wasn't quite Native Alaskan, wasn't quite Russian, wasn't quite anything I could place. "We're just checking on folks," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "Making sure everyone's okay out here. We didn't know there was a village in this valley." Joseph's expression didn't change. "We have been here for a long time. We trouble no one. We wish no trouble." "How long have you been here?" I asked. "Since the beginning," he said simply. I tried a different approach. "Is this village registered with the state? Do you receive supplies, medical services?" "We need nothing from outside," Joseph said. We have what we need." Behind him, more villagers had gathered. Men, women, children, all dressed in similar traditional clothing, all watching us with the same blank expression. There was something unsettling about their stillness, the way they didn't fidget or whisper among themselves like a normal crowd would. "Could we look around?" I asked. "Just to make sure everyone's all right. It's part of my job." Joseph considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You may look, but you must leave before full dark." He turned and walked back toward the village, clearly expecting us to follow. Tommy and I exchanged glances, then followed. The village was like stepping back in time. The buildings were constructed of logs and rough-sawn lumber, with sod roofs and small windows covered with what looked like scraped animal hide instead of glass. Smoke rose from every chimney, and the smell of burning wood mixed with something else, seal oil maybe, and the distinctive scent of tanned hides. But it was the people that made my skin crawl. They moved normally enough, going about what seemed to be daily tasks. Women scraping hides, men repairing tools, children playing simple games. But whenever we passed, they would stop and watch us, their eyes tracking our movement with an intensity that felt predatory. "This is wrong," Tommy whispered to me in English, clearly hoping the villagers wouldn't understand. "These buildings, Mike, some of this construction, it's not just old style. It looks actually old, like it's been here for decades." He was right. The wood was weathered in a way that suggested years of exposure to the elements. The paths worn in the permafrost between buildings couldn't have been made in a single season. Everything about this village suggested it had been here for a very long time. Joseph led us to the center of the village, where a larger building stood, a community hall of some sort. "You wish to know about us?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said, "starting with why you're not on any map." "Maps are made by outsiders," Joseph replied. "We did not ask to be on their maps. But surely someone knows you're here. You must trade with other villages, get supplies." "We have what we need," he repeated. I was about to press further when a woman approached, elderly and bent with age. She said something to Joseph in a language I didn't recognize. It had elements of Inupiaq, but was different. Older somehow. Joseph's expression changed, becoming harder. "You must leave now," he said abruptly. "It's only 3 p.m., I protested. "The darkness comes early here. You must leave now." There was something in his tone that made argument impossible. As we were escorted back to the edge of the village, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A group of children were playing near one of the houses, and one of them, a girl of maybe 8 or 9, was holding a doll. It was a simple thing, made of hide and fur, but dressed in a miniature version of a military uniform. A uniform with insignias I recognized from history books. It was a Soviet military uniform from the 1950s. "Tommy," I said quietly, "we need to go. Now." We made it back to the plane as the last light was fading from the sky. As we took off, I looked back at the village. Lights were beginning to appear in windows. Oil lamps, from the look of them, not electric. And in the center of the village, all the residents had gathered again, standing in the same formation, all facing our departing plane. "Mike," Tommy said as we climbed to altitude, "look at your phone. Look at the GPS." I pulled out my phone and checked our coordinates. According to the GPS, we were nowhere. The location simply didn't register. The screen showed our last known position as Bettles, even though we were 60 miles away. "It's like it doesn't exist," Tommy said. "Like the village is in some kind of dead zone that technology can't recognize." We flew back to Bettles in silence, both of us trying to process what we'd seen. When we landed, I immediately tried to research the village, starting with the name. Newcomb didn't appear in any records of Alaska native villages. But then, on a hunch, I started searching through older records. military documents from the 1950s, and that's when I found it. Operation Newcomb, a classified U.S. military operation from 1953. The details were mostly redacted, but what I could piece together was chilling. It involved a joint U.S.-Soviet scientific expedition to study anomalous phenomena in the Arctic. The operation had ended in disaster, with all 147 participants listed as missing, presumed dead after a severe storm. 147 people, the exact number I'd estimated in the village. I showed the document to Tommy, whose face went pale. "Mike, those people in the village, you don't think—" "I don't know what to think," I said. But I knew I had to go back, had to find out what was really happening in that valley. I filed a report with my superiors in Anchorage, requesting backup and resources for a full investigation. The response I got back was not what I expected. Instead of backup, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. "Sergeant Kovac, you are ordered to cease all investigation into the settlement you discovered. This is a matter of national security. Do not return to that location. Do not discuss it with anyone. Your report has been classified and sealed." "Who is this?" I demanded. "Someone who's trying to keep you alive, Sergeant. There are things in Alaska that are better left alone. That village is one of them." The line went dead. I should have listened. Should have filed the encounter away as unexplained and moved on with my life. But I'd been a cop too long to just let things go, especially when those things involved 147 people who were supposed to have died almost 70 years ago. For 3 days, I tried to follow orders. I went back to my regular patrol duties, responded to calls about drunk snowmobilers and missing hunters. But every night I found myself staring at the photographs I'd taken on my phone. Most were blurry or showed nothing but white landscape, but a few captured the village clearly. The buildings, the people, the impossible existence of it all. On the 4th night, Tommy called me. "Mike, I went back." My blood went cold. "Tommy, what the hell were you thinking?" "I had to. I kept thinking about those kids, about how they looked at us. Mike, something's wrong there. Really wrong." "Where are you now?" "Bettles. I just got back. Mike, the village is gone." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean gone. I flew over the exact same coordinates 3 times. There's nothing there but empty valley. No buildings, no smoke, no paths in the snow. Nothing. It's like it never existed." I was on a plane to Bettles the next morning. I told my supervisor I was taking personal days, didn't mention where I was going. When I arrived, Tommy looked haggard, like he hadn't slept since we'd last spoken. "Show me," I said. We took his plane again, flying the same route. My GPS still showed nothing, but Tommy knew the way by landmarks. A distinctive ridge here, a frozen river bend there. When we reached the valley, my heart sank. Tommy was right. The valley was empty. Pristine snow covered everything, unbroken by any sign of human habitation. No buildings, no smoke, no trails. Even the spot where we'd landed on the frozen lake showed no sign of our previous visit. "This is impossible," I said. "There were over 100 people here 4 days ago." "I know what we saw," Tommy said grimly. "But look at this." He banked the plane for another pass, and that's when I saw it. In the snow, barely visible from the air, was a pattern. It looked like a massive circle, maybe 300 feet across, with geometric designs inside it. The pattern was subtle, just variations in how the snow had settled, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. "Land," I told Tommy. "Same spot as before." The frozen lake was solid beneath our skis. We geared up and hiked to where the village should have been. The snow was deep, undisturbed. But as we walked, I noticed something odd. My compass was spinning slowly, unable to find north. Tommy's was doing the same thing. When we reached the center of where the village should have been, I knelt and dug through the snow. About 3 feet down, my gloved hand hit something hard. I cleared more snow away, revealing wood. Old, weathered wood. The top of what looked like a roof beam. "It's below," Tommy said, understanding immediately. "The whole village is under the snow." But that made no sense. 3 feet of snow doesn't accumulate in 4 days. Not without a major storm. And the weather had been clear. More than that, the snow wasn't fresh. It had the crusty, layered quality of snow that had been there all winter. We spent 2 hours digging, uncovering more evidence of structures beneath. But the sun was getting low, and we had to leave. As we walked back to the plane, I noticed something in the snow. Footprints, but not human. They were too long, with what looked like claw marks at the ends. They led from the buried village toward the mountains, disappearing into a line of trees. "Tommy," I said, pointing to the tracks, "what makes prints like that?" He studied them, his face growing pale. "Nothing I want to meet." That night, back in Bettles, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what happened to Operation Newcomb, classified or not. I had a contact in Anchorage, a former military intelligence officer named Sarah Chen, who now worked as a civilian contractor. If anyone could get me information, it would be her. Sarah met me at a coffee shop in downtown Anchorage 2 days later. She was in her 40s, Asian American, with the kind of alertness that came from years of dealing with secrets. "Mike, what you're asking about is beyond classified," she said quietly, glancing around the nearly empty shop. "It's in the black files, the kind of thing that doesn't officially exist." "But you found something." She slid a thumb drive across the table. "I shouldn't be giving you this. If anyone finds out..." "They won't." Operation Newcam was a joint operation like you found. But it wasn't just US and Soviet. There were scientists from Canada, Norway, even some Japanese researchers. They were investigating something called the Alaskan anomaly. What kind of anomaly? The files are vague, but from what I could piece together, it was some kind of temporal or dimensional irregularity, a place where the normal rules didn't apply. The expedition was supposed to study it, figure out if it could be weaponized. And on November 15th, 1953, they made contact with something. The last communication said they'd found inhabitants and were attempting to establish relations. Then nothing. Search parties found no trace of the expedition, the equipment, nothing. Just empty wilderness. I thought about the Soviet uniform on the child's doll, about Joseph saying they'd been there since the beginning. "Sarah, what if they're still alive? What if the expedition never left?" She shook her head. "Mike, that was almost 70 years ago. Even if they survived whatever happened, they'd be ancient by now. The youngest members would be in their 90s. But I thought about the children I'd seen playing in the village, children who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. There's more," Sarah said reluctantly. "The files mention other incidents. Teams sent to investigate over the years who came back wrong. Wrong how? Changed. Some went insane, talking about a village that moved through time, about people who weren't really people anymore. Others just disappeared entirely. The military finally declared the area off limits in 1978. As far as I can tell, no official expedition has gone there since. Until I stumbled onto it. Mike, you need to leave this alone. Whatever's happening up there, it's beyond our understanding. The people who dig too deep into this don't come back, or they come back broken. But I couldn't leave it alone. Those were American citizens out there, even if they were from 1953. They needed help, or at least someone needed to understand what had happened to them. I thanked Sarah and left, my mind already planning my next move. I went back to Bettles the next day, but Tommy refused to fly me out again. "I'm done, Mike," he said. I've been having dreams. Dreams about the village, about the people there. They're calling me back, and I'm scared if I go, I won't leave. So I hired another pilot, a young guy named Brett who didn't ask questions as long as the money was good. I told him I was doing geological surveys, had him drop me off at the frozen lake with camping gear and a satellite phone. I'll be back in 3 days, I told him. If I don't call by then, send help. As his plane disappeared into the gray sky, I shouldered my pack and headed for the valley. The buried village was as I'd left it, but this time I'd come prepared. I had a ground-penetrating radar unit borrowed from a friend who did archaeological work. I spent the first day mapping what was beneath the snow. The village was all there, perfectly preserved beneath 3 feet of snow that shouldn't exist. But the radar showed something else, something that made me question my sanity. The readings showed the buildings were simultaneously there and not there, existing in what the device could only interpret as probability spaces. As night fell, I set up camp at the edge of the valley. The aurora borealis was active, green curtains of light dancing across the sky. But as I watched, the lights began to behave strangely, seeming to spiral down toward the valley in patterns that hurt to look at. And then I heard them. Voices, carried on the wind. Singing. It was a hymn, something I half remembered from childhood, but sung in harmonies that no human throat should have been able to produce. The voices were coming from beneath the snow. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate. As I approached the buried village, the snow began to glow with a faint blue light. The glow intensified, and suddenly, impossibly, the snow was gone. The village stood before me, exactly as it had been on my first visit. Smoke rose from chimneys, lights glowed in windows, and in the center of the village, all 147 residents stood in a circle, singing. Joseph Newcomb broke from the circle and walked toward me. But something was different about him. His movements were too fluid, too perfect, like someone had studied how humans walk and was imitating it precisely. "Sergeant Kovac," he said, and his voice had that same multi-tonal quality as the singing. "You should not have returned." "What are you?" I asked, my hand instinctively going to my sidearm. "We are what we were made to be," he replied. "The expedition succeeded, in a way. They found the anomaly, found the place where time folds back on itself. They tried to study it, to understand it, but you cannot study something like that without becoming part of it." "You're the expedition members?" "We were. Now we are more, and less. We exist in multiple states simultaneously, 1953, 2022, and many points in between. We are here and not here, alive and not alive." "The children," I said. "How are their children if you've been here since 1953? Joseph smiled, an expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Time is not a line, Sergeant. It's a web. The children were born in 1953, in 1967, in 1984, in 2001. All simultaneously. They age and don't age. They are eternal and temporary." My head was spinning, trying to process what he was saying. "Why show yourself to me? Why let me find you?" "We didn't let you find us. You were always going to find us. It already happened, is happening, will happen. And now you're part of it too." I felt it then, a sensation like reality shifting around me. I looked at my hands, and for a moment, I could see through them, could see multiple versions of myself standing in the same spot. Younger, older, different choices leading to different lives, all existing at once. "No," I said, backing away. "I'm leaving." "You can try," Joseph said sadly. "Others have tried. But once you've seen the truth of time, you can't unsee it. You'll carry it with you, and eventually, it will call you back." I ran ran back to my camp, packed frantically, and called Brett on the satellite phone. "Emergency extraction," I said. "Now." While I waited for the plane, I looked back at the valley. The village was gone again, buried under snow that had no right to be there. But I could still hear the singing, faint but persistent, carried on the wind. Brett picked me up 3 hours later. As we flew away, I looked back one more time. The valley was empty, but in the pattern of the snow, I could see faces. 147 faces, looking up at the sky, watching me leave, or watching me arrive, or both, or neither. Time isn't a line. The dreams started the night I got back to Fairbanks. In them, I was in the village, but it wasn't 2022. It was 1953, and I was wearing a military uniform, taking notes as Soviet and American scientists set up equipment I didn't recognize. Then it would shift, and it was 1978, and I was part of a military team sent to investigate, finding the village empty but somehow still inhabited. Then 2022 again. But this time I lived there, had always lived there, was married to a woman whose face kept changing every time I looked at her. I'd wake up gasping, my apartment feeling foreign and wrong, like I didn't belong there. Like I belonged in the village that existed in all times and no time at once. For 2 weeks I tried to return to normal duty, but normal had become a relative concept. I'd be writing a report and suddenly see the words changing on the page, showing reports I hadn't written yet, or had written years ago in a life I hadn't lived. I'd look at suspects and see multiple versions of them, who they were, who they could have been, who they would become. My supervisor, Captain Diana Reeves, called me into her office on March 3rd. "Mike, what the hell is going on with you?" she asked, not unkindly. Diana was tough but fair, a 25-year veteran who'd seen her share of weird Alaska cases. "Your reports are getting stranger. Yesterday you filed a missing person report for someone who doesn't exist." I looked at the file she pushed across the desk. It was indeed a missing person report, filled out in my handwriting for someone named David Chen. But I had no memory of writing it. I started, then stopped. How could I explain that David Chen did exist, just not in this timeline? That I'd met him in the village in a timeline where he'd been part of a 1987 expedition that had also been absorbed? "You're taking leave," Diana said firmly. 2 weeks, minimum. Get your head straight, Mike. See a counselor if you need to, but figure this out, because I can't have you in the field like this. I agreed, knowing it wouldn't help. You can't counsel away the knowledge that reality isn't what you thought it was. But the leave gave me time to do what I needed to do. Research. I dove into every record I could find about temporal anomalies, dimensional rifts, places where reality got thin. Most of it was crackpot conspiracy theories, but buried in the noise were patterns. Reports from around the world of villages that appeared and disappeared, of expeditions that found impossible things and came back changed or didn't come back at all. And there were others like me. People who'd encountered these anomalies and lived to tell about it, though lived was a relative term. I found a support group online, hidden in the deep corners of the internet, where people shared their experiences with what they called temporal contamination. One member, username ChronoSurvivor, sent me a private message. "Alaska, right? The village that exists in all times? You've been there." We arranged to talk on an encrypted line. ChronoSurvivor turned out to be Dr. Marcus Webb, a physicist who'd been part of a 1995 expedition to study the anomaly. "You're experiencing temporal fragmentation," he explained. "Your consciousness has been exposed to non-linear time. Part of you exists in multiple timelines now. It's going to get worse before it gets better." How do I stop it? You don't. You can't unknow what you know, but you can learn to manage it, to observe the other timelines without getting lost in them. Think of it like like looking at a photo album instead of living in the photos. The village, I said. What is it really? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Best theory? It's a point where our dimension intersects with others. The expedition in 1953 didn't just find the anomaly, they became part of it. They exist in a superposition of states, all possibilities simultaneously true, and anyone who interacts with them risks the same fate. Can they be saved? Saved from what? From their perspective, they're not trapped. They're expanded. They experience all of time at once. Past, present, future. It's all now to them. The question isn't, can they be saved, but would they want to be? I thought about Joseph Newcomb's sad smile when he'd told me I couldn't leave it behind. Had he been trying to warn me or welcome me? That night, the dreams were different. I was in the village again, but this time I was aware it was a dream. I found Joseph in the community hall, but he looked different. Younger, older, both neither. "You're beginning to understand," he said, his voice echoing with possibilities. "I'm losing my mind," I replied. "No, you're expanding it. Most humans can only perceive time linearly, like watching a movie frame by frame. But you've seen behind the screen. You know all the frames exist simultaneously." "I don't want this." Neither did we at first. The expedition came here to study the anomaly, to harness it. We thought we could control it, use it. But you can't control something that exists outside of causality. It changed us, made us part of itself. "Are you really Joseph Newcomb? Or are you something else using his appearance?" He smiled, that same sad expression. "I am Joseph Newcomb. I am also Dr. Yuri Volkov from the Soviet team. I am Lieutenant James Mitchell from the U.S. military escort. I am all of them and none of them. Individual identity becomes fluid when you exist in multiple states." "Why children?" I asked. "Why are there children in the village?" "Because in some timelines we had children. In some, those children grew up and had their own children. In others, they remained young forever. All states exist simultaneously. The 8-year-old girl you saw is also a grandmother of 6, is also someone who was never born, is also someone who will be born tomorrow." I woke from the dream with a nosebleed, my head pounding. When I looked in the mirror, I could swear I saw other faces superimposed over mine. Younger versions, older versions, versions where I'd made different choices. The next day, Tommy called me. "Mike, I'm seeing things," he said, his voice strained. "The village. It's here in Bettles. Not all of it, just glimpses. A building that shouldn't be there, gone when I blink. People in 1950s clothing walking down the street, but only I can see them. It's spreading," I realized with growing horror. "The anomaly. Our contact with it is causing it to expand." I called Marcus immediately. "Is it possible for the anomaly to grow? To affect areas outside the original zone?" "Theoretically, yes," he said, sounding worried. "If enough people become contaminated, if enough consciousness becomes tangled with it, it could create new intersection points." "How many people have been exposed?" I did a quick count. Myself, Tommy, Brett, the pilot, the military teams over the years, Sarah who'd accessed the files. Maybe a dozen directly, but who knows how many indirectly. "You need to contain this," Marcus said urgently. "If it spreads to a population center." I thought about Fairbanks, about Anchorage, about what would happen if entire cities started existing in multiple timelines simultaneously. The chaos would be unimaginable. How do I contain something that exists outside of normal space-time? You can't, but you might be able to redirect it. The anomaly seems to be attracted to consciousness, to observers. If you could provide it with a strong enough focal point, you might be able to draw it back to its original location. You mean use myself as bait? I mean offer yourself as an anchor. Someone who fully accepts the non-linear nature of time, who can exist in multiple states without fragmenting completely. It's dangerous. You could lose yourself entirely, become like the villagers. I thought about my life. 47 years old, divorced, no kids, a job that was slowly killing me even before I encountered the anomaly. What did I really have to lose? Tell me what I need to do. Marcus walked me through the theory. The anomaly was like a quantum experiment. It existed in superposition until observed, at which point it collapsed into a specific state. But because the villagers existed in multiple states simultaneously, they prevented that collapse. They were permanent observers of all possibilities. You need to become a singular observer, Marcus explained. Choose one timeline, one reality, and hold to it absolutely. Your certainty could force the anomaly to collapse into that single state, at least temporarily. And if I can't hold it, then you become part of the village permanently. I made my preparations carefully. I wrote letters to people I cared about, knowing they might be the last communications I ever sent. I transferred my savings to my sister in Oregon, made sure my will was updated. Then I flew back to Bettles. Tommy was worse. He was seeing the village constantly now, existing in both places at once. His eyes had the 1,000-yard stare of someone seeing too much. I'm going back, I told him. I'm going to try to fix this. You can't fix time, Mike. It just is. Maybe, but I can try to keep it from spreading. He nodded slowly, understanding. I'll fly you. One last time. The flight was surreal. Tommy kept commenting on things I couldn't see. Other planes flying alongside us from different eras, mountains that existed in some timelines but not others. His hands were steady on the controls, but I could see the strain in his face. When we reached the valley, the village was visible, but it was wrong. Multiple versions of it existed simultaneously. The 1953 original, the 2022 version I'd first encountered, and dozens of iterations in between. Buildings appeared and disappeared. People walked through the same space in different decades, and at the center of it all was the anomaly itself. I could see it now, really see it. It was like looking at a hole in reality, a place where all possibilities existed at once. It hurt to perceive, but I forced myself to focus on it. Land, I told Tommy. Mike, if you go in there, I know. We landed on the frozen lake, which was simultaneously frozen, melted, and non-existent. I had to focus on the frozen version to walk on it. Each step was an act of will, choosing which reality to inhabit. The villagers were waiting for me, all 147 of them, in all their iterations. Joseph/Yuri, James, stood at the front, his face cycling through identities. You've come to join us, he said. It wasn't a question. I've come to make a choice, I replied. I walked to the center of the village, to the spot where the anomaly was strongest. Reality was thinnest here, and I could feel myself beginning to fragment. I saw my life spreading out in all directions, timelines where I'd never become a cop, where I'd died in Afghanistan, where I'd had children, where I'd never been born. But I held on to one truth, one certainty. I was Sergeant Mike Kovac, Alaska State Trooper, and I was here on March 17th, 2022, to prevent this anomaly from spreading. I pushed that certainty outward, using every ounce of will I had. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, reality began to solidify around me. The multiple versions of the village began to collapse into one, the 2022 version. With the expedition members aged but alive, the villagers screamed, not in pain but in loss, as their expanded consciousness was compressed back into linear time. The children disappeared. They had never existed, or had existed and grown old, or had existed in another timeline entirely. Joseph stood before me, just Joseph now, an elderly man in his 90s, looking confused and lost. What "What year is it?" he asked. 2022, I told him. "You've been here for 69 years. The anomaly was still there, I could feel it, but it was contained, locked into a single timeline by my observation, by my choice. But I could also feel the cost. Part of me was anchored to this place now, would always be anchored here. I could leave physically, but some part of my consciousness would remain, keeping the anomaly collapsed, preventing it from spreading. "We need to evacuate them," I told Tommy when I returned to the plane. "Get rescue teams here. These people need medical attention, psychological help." "Mike, your eyes." I looked in the plane's mirror. My eyes had changed. They held depths that hadn't been there before, reflections of times that were and weren't. I was still Mike Kovac, but I was also the Mike Kovac who had chosen to stay, who had chosen to leave, who had never come here at all. "I'm okay," I lied. "Let's get help for these people." The rescue operation was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. Officially, we'd discovered a remote religious commune that had been living off the grid for decades. The elderly members were suffering from mass delusion brought on by isolation and possibly contaminated water supply. The story was absurd, but it was the kind of absurd that people could accept. The truth would have been harder to swallow. The evacuation took 3 days. Military helicopters flew in. Medics treated the expedition members, those who had aged normally once I'd collapsed the timeline. Of the original 147, only 43 were still alive in our singular timeline. The rest had either died of old age in the intervening decades or had never existed in this version of events. The mathematics of it made my head hurt if I thought about it too long. Joseph Newcomb, whose real name turned out to be Dr. Joseph Novak, a quantum physicist from MIT circa 1953, was airlifted to Anchorage. Before he left, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You've taken our place," he said, his eyes clearing for a moment. "Someone has to anchor it. Someone always has to anchor it." "I know," I replied. "It will call others. The anomaly needs consciousness to define itself. You'll have to keep them away, or teach them what you've learned." "For how long?" He smiled sadly. "Time isn't a line, Sergeant. You'll be here for no time, and all time. You've already been here forever, and you've never been here at all." The words should have been nonsense, but I understood them perfectly. The military sealed off the valley after the evacuation. Officially, it was due to environmental contamination. Unofficially, several federal agencies whose names were just acronyms I didn't recognize set up a permanent monitoring station. They offered me a position as a consultant, which really meant they wanted to keep tabs on me. I accepted, but not for the reason they thought. I returned to Fairbanks to wrap up my affairs. Captain Reeves was waiting with my resignation papers already prepared. "I don't know what happened out there, Mike," she said. "And I don't think I want to know. But you're different now. Changed. This job, it's not for you anymore." She was right. How could I write traffic tickets when I could see the driver in multiple timelines? How could I investigate crimes when I knew that in other realities they hadn't happened or had happened differently or were happening right now? "Take care of yourself," Diana said as I turned in my badge. "Whatever you found out there, I hope it was worth it." Worth. Another concept that had become relative. I moved to Bettles permanently. It was close enough to the valley that I could monitor it, far enough that the anomaly's direct influence was minimal. Tommy was there too, similarly changed. We didn't talk much about what we'd experienced, but we didn't need to. We could see it in each other's eyes, the depth, the multiplicity, the burden of knowing too much. The monitoring station was a small building filled with equipment that supposedly measured electromagnetic fields, gravitational fluctuations, and quantum variations. Most of it was for show. The real monitoring was done by people like me, those who had been touched by the anomaly and could sense when it was stirring. My official title was Anomaly Response Coordinator. My real job was to be a lighthouse keeper for reality. The first incident came 2 months after the evacuation. A group of extreme hikers had somehow bypassed the military perimeter and were heading toward the valley. I intercepted them 5 miles out, using my federal credentials to turn them back. They complained, threatened to post about government cover-ups online. I let them. Conspiracy theories were easier to dismiss than the truth. The second incident was more serious. A Russian scientific expedition, following up on old Soviet records about Operation Nukem, tried to reach the valley. This required federal intervention, diplomatic channels, veiled threats about international incidents. They turned back, but I knew they'd try again. The anomaly called to curious minds like a siren song. But the real challenge came from the anomaly itself. Even collapsed into a single timeline, it wasn't stable. Reality remained thin in the valley. On certain nights, when the aurora borealis was particularly active, I could see the village reforming. Not physically, but as an echo, a possibility trying to reassert itself. Each time, I had to reinforce my observation, my choice of which timeline was real. The effort was exhausting. Each intervention left me a little less grounded in normal reality. I started keeping detailed journals, not just of events, but of which timeline I was choosing to inhabit. Some mornings, I'd wake up and have to check my notes to remember which version of events was supposed to be true. Tommy helped when he could, but he was fighting his own battle. The temporal contamination affected him differently. He existed in multiple times simultaneously but was aware of all of them. He'd have conversations with people from different decades, all happening at once in his perception. Eventually, he stopped flying. The risk of him getting temporally confused while piloting was too great. We weren't alone in our vigil. Dr. Marcus Webb visited every few months, bringing supplies and news from the outside world. Sarah Chen, my contact who'd first given me the classified files, turned out to be part of a larger organization that monitored anomalies worldwide. There are 12 known sites, she told me during one visit, places where reality is negotiable. Each one has a keeper, someone like you who maintains the boundary. What happens if a keeper fails? Then the anomaly expands. Best case, it affects a small area and we can contain it. Worst case, well, there are cities that used to exist that don't anymore. Not destroyed, just edited out of the timeline. The responsibility was overwhelming. I was literally holding reality together through sheer will and observation. 1 year after the evacuation, on a particularly dark winter night, I had a visitor. Not in the physical sense, but in the space between waking and sleeping where the anomaly was strongest. It was the collective consciousness of the original expedition, the parts of them that still existed in the collapsed possibilities. "You're dying," they told me, their voices harmonizing across timelines. The human mind isn't meant to maintain this kind of observation indefinitely. I knew they were right. I could feel it in my body. The strain of existing partially in multiple timelines was taking its toll. I was aging faster in some timelines, slower in others, but the average was not in my favor. "How long do I have?" "Time isn't—" "I know time isn't a line," I interrupted. "But in this timeline, the one I'm maintaining, how long?" 2 years, maybe 3. "What happens to the anomaly when I die?" "It expands. Unless what? Unless you train a replacement. Someone who can take over the observation, maintain the collapse." I thought about it. Condemning someone else to this existence, to being forever partially unstuck in time, seemed cruel. But the alternative was potentially losing entire cities to temporal instability. Or, the collective continued, you could let go. Stop maintaining the singular timeline. Join us in the superposition. Exist in all times, all possibilities. It was tempting. To stop fighting, stop choosing, just exist in the infinite now that the original expedition had discovered. But I thought about the chaos that would cause, the lives that would be affected. No, I said firmly. I'll find another way. The solution came from an unexpected source. 3 months later, a young woman named Jennifer Tikiak arrived in Bettles. She was Inupiaq, a graduate student in quantum physics from UAF, and she had dreams about the valley. My grandmother told me stories, she explained when we met, about places where the world is thin, where different times blend together. She said our family had a responsibility to watch these places, to keep them from spreading. I thought it was just folklore until I started having the dreams. She was already partially connected to the anomaly, a natural sensitivity that ran in certain bloodlines. Indigenous peoples had been dealing with these sites long before Western science stumbled onto them. I can teach you, I offered. But once you learn, you can't unlearn. You'll be changed forever. I'm already changed, she replied. At least this way, I'll understand why. Training Jennifer took a year. Teaching someone to observe reality in a way that collapsed quantum superposition without losing themselves in the process was like teaching someone to breathe underwater. It required a fundamental shift in how she perceived existence. But she was a natural. Her cultural background, with its nonlinear understanding of time and connection to the land, made the concepts easier for her to grasp. Where I had to fight to maintain a singular timeline, she seemed to flow with it, guiding reality rather than forcing it. Your people knew about this, I said one day as we stood at the edge of the valley. We've always known, she replied. We just had different words for it. You call it an anomaly. We called it a breathing spot, a place where the world inhales and exhales different possibilities. By my 3rd year as keeper, Jennifer was ready to take over primary observation. The transition was gradual. She would maintain the collapse for hours, then days, while I rested. Each time she took control, I felt a loosening, a relief from the constant pressure of holding reality in place. Tommy passed away that winter. Not dramatically, just quietly in his sleep. But I saw him afterward, existing in the timelines that hadn't quite let go. He seemed peaceful, finally able to experience all times without the confusion that had plagued him in life. It's not so bad, his echo told me, once you stop trying to make it make sense. Dr. Joseph Novak died 2 weeks later in a nursing home in Anchorage, the last of the original expedition, at least in this timeline. But I could feel them all, still existing in the possibilities, in the paths not taken. On the 4th anniversary of my first encounter with the village, I made my decision. Jennifer was ready, more ready than I had ever been. She understood the anomaly in a way I never could, saw it as part of the natural order rather than an aberration to be contained. I'm leaving, I told her. Not just Bettles, Alaska, maybe the country, somewhere far enough that the connection weakens. Will that work? She asked. I don't know, but I need to try. I need to know if I can still exist as just Mike Kovac, not as the keeper, not as someone partially unstuck in time. She nodded, understanding. The valley will be safe. My family has been preparing for this responsibility for generations, even if we didn't fully understand what we were preparing for. I left on a clear morning in March, 5 years after first discovering the village. As the plane lifted off from Bettles, I looked back at the mountains that hid the valley. For a moment, I saw it all. Every timeline, every possibility. The village that existed and didn't exist. The expedition that was still there and had never been there at all. Then I closed my eyes, made my choice, and let it go. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The constant pressure I'd lived with for 5 years eased. I was just Mike Kovac again, mostly. The knowledge remained, the understanding that reality was far more fluid than most people realized. but the responsibility had passed to someone better equipped to handle it. I settled in a small town in Maine, about as far from Alaska as I could get while staying in the country. I worked as a security consultant, a job that required no engagement with temporal anomalies or reality-threatening phenomena. For 6 months, I almost felt normal. Then the dreams started again. Not about the village in Alaska, but about something here, something old in the Atlantic, something that fishermen had been avoiding without quite knowing why for generations. Because here's the truth I learned. The anomalies aren't random. They're not mistakes or glitches in reality. They're pressure valves, places where the infinite possibilities of existence can bleed through. And some of us, for whatever reason, are sensitive to them. We're drawn to them, or they're drawn to us. Maybe it's genetic, like Jennifer's family. Maybe it's psychological, minds that can handle the paradox of multiple realities. Or maybe it's just bad luck, being in the wrong place at the wrong time and seeing something you can't unsee. I ignored the dreams for a while, but eventually I made a call to Sarah Chen. "There's something off the coast of Maine," I told her. "We know," she replied. "We were wondering when you'd notice. Are you ready to get back to work?" I thought about the village in Alaska, about Jennifer maintaining the boundary, about Tommy existing peacefully in multiple timelines. I thought about the responsibility of keeping reality stable for people who would never know it needed keeping. "Time isn't a line," I said, repeating the words that had become my mantra. "No," Sarah agreed. "It's a web, and we're the spiders trying to keep it from tangling." I took the assignment, because that's what people like us do. We stand at the boundaries, at the places where reality gets thin, and we hold the line. Not because we want to, but because someone has to. The village in Alaska still exists, in all its timelines, and none of them. Jennifer keeps watch, as her children will after her, and their children after them. The anomaly remains, waiting, patient, eternal. And somewhere, in the possibilities that weren't chosen, 147 members of a 1953 expedition still walk through a village that exists outside of time, experiencing all of eternity in a single moment. Time isn't a line, it's a choice. And every day, people like Jennifer and me make that choice for everyone else. They never thank us. They never know we exist. But we keep watching anyway. Because someone has to. End recording. Sergeant Mike Kovac's current whereabouts are classified. Reports of anomalous activity off the coast of Maine are under investigation. The village at coordinates redacted remains under federal quarantine. Do not attempt to locate or visit the site. Time isn't a line. But sometimes, it's better to pretend it is.